Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Benjamin Johnson. I'm the events coordinator here for McNally Robinson Booksellers in Saskatoon. This event is being held on Treaty 6 territory, which is the homeland of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, and Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. As we listen to our speakers share their words today, may we recognize the Indigenous stories that have been shared on this land since time immemorial. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of The Activist, a Daoist Protest Manual by Daniel Freed, published by Globe Pequot Publishing. Joining us as guest host this evening is George Keyworth. Thank you so much to Daniel and George for being here this evening and for working with us to make this event happen. Just a note, this event is being live streamed, so please be aware of the webcam off to your right. I'd also like to take this time to encourage you to silence your phones for the duration of the event. If you'd like to buy copies of The Activist, that includes our presenters. If you'd like to buy copies of The Activists, we have some up here on the signing table behind me, as well as on the desk by where you first walked in. You're welcome to get your book signed before you purchase it, but please remember to stop by the cash desk on your way out. Without further ado, let me introduce our speakers. Our host, George Keyworth, is Associate Professor and Head of the Department of History at the University of Saskatchewan. Dr. Keyworth studies the religious history of medieval China and Japan. His work explores how Buddhism shaped literature, poetry, and cultural life. He's written about Buddhist monks, sacred texts composed in China and preserved in places like Dunhuang and Japan, and handwritten scripture collections created for Japanese Shinto shrines. He also mentors graduate students researching religion in China, Japan, and Korea, including Buddhist and Daoist traditions. Daniel Freed is Professor of Classical Chinese and Chair of the Department of East Asian Studies at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Canada. His research specialization is in ancient and medieval Chinese philosophies of language and communication, and he's published 2 scholarly monographs on the subject, Dao and Sign in History and the First Print Era. The Activist is his first work of literary nonfiction. And without further ado, I'll welcome Daniel up. Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. Thank you for everyone who showed up, and for anyone who's joining us on the live stream, thank you. I guess George was announced as my host, but I'm giving him a promotion to a more important role that I've discussed. So basically what we're just going to do is I'll introduce my book and just read a few passages from it. And then I'll ask George to come up, and George is an outstanding scholar of medieval Chinese and Japanese religion, especially Buddhism, but also Taoism. And George will provide some historical context on some of the things that I'm talking about. And then we'll engage in a dialogue and also open things up to the floor. So we would love to have a discussion with all of you. As Benjamin mentioned, I'm a scholar of classical Chinese literatures, especially Taoist literatures. And Taoism is an ancient philosophy that has metaphysical, ethical, political stances that all try to disrupt commonplace ways of thinking about the world. And because I'm steeped in this stuff, it informs the way that I see the world, just like we all bring our own experiences to the world. When I see all the terrible things that are happening in the world nowadays and means of fighting back against those terrible things, I of course, I filter it through my own work, my own life, my own experience, my reading experience. And so thinking about current events of the last few years as a scholar of Taoism, I feel like this tradition has helped me to think about some ways in which very well-meaning people have made some, what I think of as mistakes in resistance. People putting too much emphasis on non-violent but high conflict action as a way of getting their point across. And sometimes high conflict action stiffens opposition and promotes backlash. But in contrast, Taoism often tries to promote low conflict action, or even non-action, a concept that's called in Chinese wu wei. So this Taoist wu wei can sometimes literally mean doing nothing at all, but often it means acting naturally along the grain of the world and then staging interventions in the world in ways and in places that they can be most effective, rather than spending all your energy fighting against something that is immovable or impossible to fix. So I wrote this book to take some of those insights out of their context in ancient China and just reimagine them for 21st century political context. And that wasn't too hard to reimagine them because some of the principles of Daoism seem to have some direct application. Those principles include things like suspicion of binary thinking, flowing away from the impossible and toward the possible, working without ego, preserving naturalness and spontaneity, rest, calm, and self-care, seeing clearly without presupposition, and then sometimes just being nonconformist enough to not let yourself be used by whatever system wants to use you. So this book has a few different parts. There's an intro, there's a very personal essay near the beginning, there's some historical info on Daoism, but the heart of the book is sort of a rewriting of the classical texts of Daoism. The first two great books of Daoism are called the Dao and the Zhuangzi. And I have just taken a few passages out of those two books and sort of reimagined them for the 21st century. And so I'm just going to read a few of those passages now before I turn things over to George. So first, I'll take a few passages from my rewritten version of the Dao De Jing. I don't know if anyone has read the original Dao De Jing. Yeah, okay, great. So you probably know that much of it has this very sort of vague, mystical kind of sense to it. There's a hard style. It's sort of hard to tell what it's talking about. So I've tried to keep some of that style intact here, while also making it understandable in the 21st century. So I'll just read a few passages. What is shouted is not what is thought. What is howled is not what gave birth to the heart. The trace before the thought is the beginning of justice, and the parent of the heart is the origin of every movement. You must pull back from your own words to that origin before you launch again into speech. Then you can know speech in its million-fold ends. Back and forth, the journey of the activist, from end to end, because there is no end of ends, no source for the source. There can be no success unless one is motionless, every fist pump. The supreme good is like water. Water flows down to those who need it. An elk lowering its head to drink from a stream, silver grass upon a lower western slope, a young girl who needs to wash the stink from her curls. Water never launches an uprising. It settles in the calm, in the lowest of the low. In a march, it is the road that matters. In a sit-in, it is the seat that matters. In an occupation, it is the building that matters. In a boycott, it is the unspent dollar that matters. In a placard, it is the handle that matters. In a slogan, it is the unvoiced intention that matters. Change comes from the unmoved foundation, that which does not contend, does not engage, and does not act. Like water, the activist grounds themselves in the lowest place and becomes still there. In life, the human body is soft and flexible. Only when it is dead does it wither. In life, grasses, leaves, and branches are elastic and supple. Only when they are dead do they grow hard and brittle. Therefore, firmness and inflexibility are the way of death, but pliancy and yielding are the way of life. A firm demand not be met, and a hard thrust will only injure yourself. Instead, be soft and yielding as water, and you will carry everything before you like a tsunami. To shrink injustice, stretch it to vast and perfect thinness. To weaken evil, pump it full of steroids. To pop a system, incite it to swell with pride. To seize accounts, gain access through donations. This is smart subtlety, to conquer through yielding. Always be the attacked, not the attacker. Always be the humiliated, not the humiliator. Always be the punching bag, absorbing blows with a thud, uncomplaining, swinging slightly under received momentum. Do not even appear to have a mind or a purpose. Do have a mind or a purpose, but do not show it to anyone except occasionally to yourself. The activist is a flounder, skimming the ocean floor, never rising to where he can be fathomed. Oh, and next I'll just read two passages from my rewritten version of the second book of Taoism called the Zhuangzi. If anyone has read this book, you'll know it's very different in style. It's much more playful. There's a lot of goofy allegories in this text. It's one of my favorite books. So I'll read a couple passages with some little allegories, starting a character named Joe, J-O. Joe is the author of the book, Mr. Zhuang. His given name was Joe. So that's essentially a reworked version of him. Okay, it was the middle of the night, and Joe could not sleep. She sat up and played her resounding zither as her thin curtains shone through with bright moonlight. Then she wrote the following in her journal. It is not that I do not understand the value of thinking and acting tactically on the way to my goal. It is that you do not understand that you are taught by tactics to pursue the wrong goal. A chess grandmaster named Hond was visiting Manhattan. He had heard of an unnamed, shabby old man playing chess in Central Park who would lay down his white hairs each night beneath the pines and clouds. This man may have been homeless and no one knew his name, but the regular park players called him Hum because he was always saying when sitting at the chess tables. Hond had heard that Hum had never lost a match, so he was eager to find him and play against him. In preparation, Hond was expecting a brilliant form of unorthodox park playing style, so he reviewed all of his notes on the most unconventional tactics and famous, surprising games from tournament play. Hond found Hum and sat down across from him. He then opened with a simple e4, waiting to see where his brilliant and unorthodox opponent might take the game. At this point, Hum grabbed Hond's backpack and ran out of the park, remaining undefeated. By devoting oneself to tactics, one loses sight of strategy. By devoting oneself to strategy, one loses sight of the world. The incense could burn forever behind royal curtains, but it's only lit when there's a concubine to play the flute. If I were to pursue my well-defined political goal by making lists of activism do's and don'ts, I would have an orderly movement but would not advance toward my goal. If I were to pursue my well-defined political goal by organizing a continent-wide multi-channel campaign involving millions, I would advance toward my goal, but would increase continent-wide stress, anger, depression, and misery in excess of the good of my goal. This is why I do not plan to effect change efficiently upon others. I change, and I invite the others along. One more passage, and then I'll invite Georgia. Those who understand volume are few in this world. Joe was walking the course when she came to the edge of the abyss. Standing at the edge of the abyss was Bruises the Desiderado, and he seemed to be shouting something. His mouth was flapping and contorted with muscle strain. His brow was red with sweat. His veins were popping in great plumb lines from his throat, and every muscle and ligament was taut as he thrashed out the motions of someone caught in a gyre. However, as he continued to make the motions of someone screaming at his utmost volume, nothing was quite audible. There was perhaps a hint of sound, but only as someone with severe hearing loss might pick up on vibrations in the environment. He was simply too muffled. Joe came up beside Bruce's and asked him with utmost serenity and with the most even-keeled speaking voice, "What are you trying to shout into the abyss?" Bruises noticed Joe for the first time and needed a few seconds to catch his breath. He huffed and puffed his way back toward normal sociability, wiped his sweat with a rough hand, and straightened himself to address her. "I am demanding justice. The world is on fire and I need to wake people, but the abyss will not let me even get the word out. When I shout, I can hear the word transiting through my own skull structure to my eardrum, but I can hear nothing coming through the air. It is like being smothered with a pillow. As soon as I open my mouth to scream, the cockney nothing is already there, annihilating noise from the very roots of the sound, right there at the base of the word where yell meets intent. The harder I try to push the voice from my lungs, the more absolutely the abyss cuts me off from making any sign. Joe said to him, "That's because you don't know what kind of nothing an abyss is. It isn't the empty space of a grand lecture hall, specially architected to magnify your grand idea. It's more like intergalactic space, a smothering zip with no air, a zero prisoned off at distances where nothing not void is unimagined. An abyss has a structure, but it's very finely milled, so you must slip your prayers into its interstices. Listen." Joe then walked up right to the edge of the abyss, cupped her left hand against the side of her mouth, and as lightly as possible whispered, "Justice." Both Joe and Bruises heard the word, and Joe put up her index finger, requesting patience. 30 seconds later, they heard the word justice coming back from the abyss, infinitesimally louder than Joe had whispered it. Another 20 seconds, and they began to hear the word coming back, overlapping with itself from different angles. Justice came forward and back, susurrating more and more loudly, twisting in loops that grew from whispers to quiet voices, to calm discussions, to importunate announcements, to thundering jeremiads, and finally to shock waves so violently beyond human hearing that if the abyss had been made from something instead of nothing, it would have split the planet apart. Instead, it split itself apart, and the abyss was no more. All right, so I'll just leave it there. You've gotten enough of a taste of that. And so now I'm happy to cede the floor to George to give us some actual historical context.
Okay, so good evening. This is very complicated to do. It's a wonderful book. That's the first thing I want to say. And Daniel, of course, contacted me to, as he said, to be a bit of a discussant, to pull out a few things for you for discussion. I really appreciate the way in which he just shared with you the two main parts of the core of the book. So first, let me say something about that, and then I'll briefly turn to what I really think is going on around this. So it seems to me that the book has four parts. And what may actually intrigue many of you in terms of thinking of purchasing a copy is actually that this is framed around some really fascinating thoughts about the way in which the world has gone awry, but not necessarily from Edmonton, Alberta, where Daniel lives. Bringing this all the way back in the one part of the world that, of course, we regularly point out has 5,000 years of recorded history. Nobody has that much. It's not entirely true. It's that the Chinese were very specific about writing ancient histories. And you might know this, that of all the ancient civilizations on the face of the planet, it's pretty much the Greeks and the Chinese that, in fact, really leaned into that concept of history. What is that? Does it have to have years? Does it have to have rulers? How does that work? And so, having framed this book that way, those two texts that he just read to you from, let me pause and say that I wouldn't say this is a retranslation. It's not. He's done that elsewhere. He's an exceptional philologist. In other words, the sort of person that really likes ancient texts. That would be the two of us. But what he's done is he's taken these wonderful books, and I would argue, for point of discussion, ripped them, oh lovingly, out of the hands of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. The first text that he told you about, which is known in Chinese as the Dao de Jing, of course, this is often translated, scholars like us prefer the title, The Classic of the Way and Its Virtue. A wonderful, wonderful scholar named Richard John Lin translated it that way. In the book that is under discussion here, The Activist, he chooses to talk about the course, as in the course of action or the course of a river, to translate that word, the way or the path, which you just heard something about. So this is not a retranslation, it's a reframing in a way that I really do think speaks to a modern audience. And in case you weren't alive during the Beat Generation, which I was not, and in case you didn't live through the hippies, which I didn't, despite the color of my hair, my parents were hippies. So that's a long time ago. And I think that this wonderfully brings these ancient texts out of that particular moment in time, which is the 60s, 70s, pretty much for any English language readers, and brings it all the way up to the present. And why that's important is that despite what may be interesting history of the middle of the 20th century, that's not where these books really belong. And I think that's one of the strengths of specifically the way in which he sort of reframes the argument around this issue of politics and the ways in which politics rarely ever benefit human beings. And the question is, how do we come to terms with that, and what kind of action or inaction would we then have or do? And that's where these two texts really stand out. So the first one is a really old text. In The Alchemist, he talks about this. It's definitely somewhere around 500 BC, something like that. It's very old. And the other text that he talks about is actually a little bit hard to find if you're a specialist in the book, because he's so clever about what he does with it. This is the chapter where he deals with this is the Master of the Encampment. And again, the book does actually address some protest movements that occurred in Alberta in recent memory, where you would think the word encampment, right? You'd imagine pickup trucks and oil rigs and stuff like that. There's the encampment. That's the context he's bringing this ancient Chinese text into, which is really clever, I think. Because that text, Zhuangzi, it's in Chinese, and as he so eloquently pointed out, he turns this into, in East Asian languages, the surname comes first, so the given name second. So Zhuangzhou is his name, and so his given name is Zhou. And so in the book, he calls him J-O, Zhou. So Zhou's talking to us about chess in Manhattan. And these themes are pulled right out of this ancient text and reframed in ways that I think a modern reader can quite not just understand what's being discussed here, but get the gist of what that book is about. I think both of the sections that he pulled out of the Zhuangzi are really good for that. So that's the heart of the book. However, in the bit of time that I have here, I've been framed as a historian, so I'm going to give you Chinese history. I'm not. If you want that, I'm more than happy to give it to you. As the introduction pointed out, both of us really enjoy things that happened 1,000 years ago in Chinese history, 1,500 years ago, very, very long time ago. But the book has a really nice discussion at the beginning in two sections. The first one is called Activism, Daos, and Don'ts. That's a play on that Chinese word Dao, which he translates in the book as course, path, or path. Others do, but literally just means the road. Daolu literally means the college drive where we're about to have the university bridge closed. It's going to be closed. The course is closed. That's what this means. And the second, so that there he gives you a list, kind of a précis, if you will, of what he's going to talk about and why. But the why is really interesting, I think. In his own introduction, he doesn't go there. So I'm going to go there. It's about his book. Happens to be a little bit of a shared history between the two of us as well. Nonetheless, this is how to fight fascism lying down. I think it's important, if you're thinking about purchasing a copy, that this thing tells you how to fight fascism lying down. And the interesting part is that he frames this in a very wonderfully 21st century way. Because I'm going to ask the audience a question. What's the fascist state of the 21st century? There's one country that self-identifies openly as being a fascist country. And yet they would never accept that label, but they love the teachings of it. Yes. Not even close. No matter how much you hate Trump, here's the problem. Biden was there before. And now Trump's that. You can't have it then. You change leaders. What are you going to do? We've got a government where the leader can't be deposed until he dies. North Korea, good. Maybe I should talk about North Korea. North Korea's best friend. China. And so China has a very important history. Modern. We would call modern. Both of us would certainly call 1900 the modern period. But this book actually frames an incident that happened in China in 1989. where, of course, the modern People's Republic of China drove tanks over and killed its own students. And this was a really serious issue for people across China for about 10 years, constantly discussed, whether they were in support of the government or not. And I really appreciate the way in which Daniel frames the discussion of political action or inaction against that. Because just for a moment, stop and realize that there's nobody in China denies the fact that that famous photo, Life magazine, voted was the most poignant photo of the 20th century happened, which is a student stood in front of a tank and then got squished by a tank. Talk about activism. And I'd be very curious to know what Daniel thinks the advice should have been to that student. But the advice in the book comes after Daniel frames this around the history of protest and speaking out, obviously for good, with a capital G, and how you might do that across time and space using ancient knowledge that is extremely well known in China today. And then he brings that over into thinking about the last maybe 5-6 years. That is to say, going back into sort of the end of COVID all the way up through all kinds of wonderful protests about Gaza and Israel and things like that. So that's what he's framing around his reading of the Tao Te Ching and the Zhuangzi. So it's a very, very clever book in that way. Not only, well, I've never seen anything like it, but he's bringing these two narratives into communication with each other in a very interesting way. Last but not least, I would point out that the book does have history. If you're thinking about purchasing a copy, it has a wonderful rundown of the world of these two texts. And the thing that he doesn't say in the book, quite surprisingly, I think, is that I believe it's still the case that the Tao Te Ching is the most translated book from Chinese into English, and about 98% of those are incredibly inaccurate. I mean, they keep us up at night when we were young graduate students because we were like, wow, I didn't know Ellen Watt said that. No, it's that bad. You're just, no, that's not what the text says. And why is picked up even in the selections you just heard him read is because the text, both of these texts are entirely written in a way to make complete fun of writing texts themselves throughout. Wonderful puns on language, wonderful clear references for anybody who knows classical Chinese or reads his book to understand that, you just can't be too serious about something that's telling you to be too serious. So that would be kind of my framing of this. The only other thing I would add in my few minutes here is that towards the end of the book, when he frames this, he does bring out, I think in a perfectly apt way, the way in which these two texts functioned a very long time ago in China. But if you have questions or something, I would imagine, and I hope you would, that you might want to ask him also about the ways in which his own experience, being a scholar of China, being a Canadian, how exactly these two things have come together and why he thinks these two texts somehow should actually apply to what we're doing today. And yes, it'd be very interesting if Trump read these things. I would very much. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much.
You can bring mics to you if you want to put down.
Sure. So I don't know. I mean, I guess we could, if we get this out of the way, we can just sit down and have a conversation.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, pass it.
Okay. I take this.
Yeah.
I should point out the reason I have my laptop is because I don't have a physical copy, as everyone in the 21st century. I would love one though.
So yes, you're getting one. I had a little bit of problem getting my writer's copies from the publisher on time to bring you one. So I'll buy a copy for you on the way out. All right, so I'm happy to just have a chat with all of you, and if any questions you want to ask myself or George, I'd love to just chat about what you think about what you've heard, or anything that you're curious about the book or about Taoism or China in general. If not, we could just chat for a while.
Sure, we can chat for a bit.
Okay.
Why not?
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much for the super kind evaluation of the book. I feel very humbled listening to that, but I'm really grateful. And it's always nice to hear praise, but it's nicer to hear praise from someone one knows is an expert. I guess you have a treasure here in Saskatoon. George's scholarship is really amazing. The one question that I heard you ask me about is Tank Man. And I think Tank Man will be familiar to, you've all seen the photograph, I assume, the one guy standing in front of a row of tanks, right? Justly famous, one of the most famous photographs of the 20th century. And kind of and it's impossible not to be inspired by that guy. It's like there's something almost like existential about like the human condition in the modern world of like the individual standing up to the state and the power of the state. And that's so resonant. And a lot of activists are inspired by that image specifically, and also that kind of feeling of like the need to stand up, even if you're all alone, and fight back. And I totally get that. And in one sense, I have nothing but admiration for that guy. Which, by the way, we to this day, we do not know who that was. No one knows what happened to him, whether he was killed, whether he was jailed, whether he escaped and lived out, or he's still alive in anonymity. We don't know. But the thing about that guy is, he didn't, if the goal was to save the Tiananmen Square protests, he failed. Like that did not have a good outcome, right? And so that's sort of one of the things that I wanted to take on in this book is, don't necessarily think about what's bold, what's inspiring, what stirs the imagination. Instead, think about what works and what doesn't work, right? And sometimes like standing directly up to force is not going to be helpful, even though it is nothing but brave and admirable. So I guess that's my take on it. Yeah.
No, I really appreciate that. And I think, full disclosure, I'm not exactly sure for Daniel, but I was actually in Beijing at that particular time. I was a very, very young student. I was not there in June. I was there into mid-May. And thinking about the significance of that time in China and the way in which it's still very, very much discussed today. And I should point this out. This is not a rave against China. I don't know for Daniel, but I spend a month and a half in China a year. The Chinese government loves to attack me and say, you can't say these things, Professor Keyworth, it's just not okay. Tiananmen never happened. You know that. And I'm thinking, sure. But the point is that when we think about the way in which history actually progresses, historians love to use this term constantly. It's sort of like how we defend ourselves against all other academics. Well, you don't know what does a psychologist do? Study the mind, I guess. But what does a philosopher do? Study the mind. So which is which? Okay, it's not joke time, but it is seriously. So the way in which historians usually defend themselves, they say we study continuity over change. That's what we do. It's either continuity or change. Which is it? Trying to figure that out. These two texts that that Daniel picks up in this retranslation, reframing, if you will, for a modern time, both speak to, I think, what Daniel just suggested, which is they speak to a very old literature in China that says it's continuity that matters. It's the success of your family across 1,000 years. How are you going to get there? Are you going to get there standing up in front of a tank? So that's the only thing I would add to that. I would point back to Daniel, though, that in the section that I was pointing out where he's talking about the Tiananmen and the history of Tiananmen with respect to modern China and leaders and things like that, he also then brings us over to protests in Alberta, which I would love if he would tell us about, because I don't live in Alberta, therefore I wouldn't know.
Sure. So, when I talk about Alberta, I mean, mostly the book is sort of it's meant for both Canadians and Americans, but kind of more for Americans because they have the bigger problems. We do. But I, I didn't want to like hide the fact that I live in Edmonton, I work in Edmonton, and so I did talk about part of the sort of the personal essay part of the book. I contrasted, what was happening on campus with the protests around Gaza a couple of years ago, and the encampment that happened on our campus, and like many campuses all around the world, there's lots of arguments about the meaning of this phenomenon. But students were very energized, very strident in many ways. And then we had they took over the quad, and then we had the police clear them out, like happened at some other campuses. It was very traumatic for everyone involved. And I contrast that to the Axe the Tax movement, which was nationwide, but it was, Alberta headquartered, as these kind of things often are. The Axe the Tax movement in Alberta, it was sort of headquartered along Route 2, near Red Deer. And they were just sort of off the highway. They didn't close the highway. They didn't occupy the highway. They were just in a rest stop, and they had some tents set up. They had some campers set up. They were offering free coffee. They had signs up like free hugs and stuff. And so, and they won. Like the students did not stop Israel from fighting in Gaza, but the tax was axed, right? Carney, that even during the campaign, he said, this has been too controversial and we're getting rid of it. And if you've just done your taxes, you found that it's gone indeed. So my point in the book was like, whatever your perspective on the causes behind these two, right? Whether you're left of center or right of center, whatever, just the methods used. One was very conflict heavy and directing protest at someone who could not make change, like the president of the University of Alberta was not in a position to change the war in Gaza, right? And one of them was sort of very soft, not very confrontational, offering free meals, free hugs, coffee, whatever, and talking mostly to a largely sympathetic audience of drivers around rural Alberta who they were just trying to give a gentle nudge toward political action. And that sort of gentle style ended up being successful. So that's the point of that lesson, was not to declare myself as a celebrant of Axe the Tax, but it was just to point out a difference in methods that was playing out at the same time. Yeah.
I'm sure we're all grateful to hear that, of course, and I also think it's a nice way to frame the book itself, because those are two very, very different examples. And of course, in talking about the Tiananmen incident in China, again, I'm pretty sure we're all aware that the government of China is still exactly the same government in place. It absolutely loves putting people in jail, gulags, and things like that, and protests are utterly useless. And so obviously you frame this very nicely. What I also found was interesting in the book is, and I could be wrong, in which case I'm going to have egg on my face, but that's okay. Throughout the book, you make a number of references, I believe even in the reframing retranslations as well, to a bit of a scourge when we think about the causes of very strong opinions. That's, I think, a nice way of putting what we're talking about here, is when we tend to put ourselves up in front and say, I'm right, you're wrong. That's the way it's going to be. That generally doesn't get you anywhere. And these two books are extremely good books throughout very old texts that allude to exactly that fact, that if you're going to make that case, things are not going to go very well for you. And as you alluded to, it's not going to work. But you make a number of references to YouTube in the book. And I'm wondering if you might sort of pull those together and sort of give us a sense of exactly how you, because in the book, I keep noticing these references. I'm thinking, what are you thinking is there?
To YouTube specifically, or social media in general? I can't, to be honest, I can't remember which examples used which online media. um, but this was actually at the event in Edmonton. I was asked about this a lot because the audience there was actually a lot of university students came out for that event, and of course, is a very online demographic. Um, and my colleague there actually asked for a show of hands from the audience of who thought this social media is helpful and who thought it's unhelpful, and it was split half and half. I think social media in terms of activism does have some use in that, like, for instance, if people are really in the thick of some situation and you're like live streaming to Facebook and someone's getting injured and you need help, like that's a way to call people over, right? Like I don't want to be absolutist about this, but in general, I'm fairly negative about the uses of online fighting. I mean, if any of you in the audience have tried having an argument online with someone, my guess is you were not successful in persuading them of your point of view. I'm not sure that anyone in the history of the internet has been successful in winning a fight online about politics. People just get angry and you retreat into your own positions, and that, I think that's because oftentimes, I mean, the Daoist tradition, as you know, is in some ways very suspicious of language. It says language imposes a kind of false dichotomous order on the world sometimes, right? And obviously, Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi did not have social media accounts, but a lot of what social media is sort of leans. To me, it seems like it leans into the things that Taoism is suspicious about with language, like decontextualizing, just simplifying down to little snippets, right, of left versus right, good versus evil. This, is something a genocide? Yes or no? Fight about it. Like that kind of thing does not actually advance people's happiness. It does not advance calm, peace, the things that we want to see in the world. So that's why the book is often very kind of suspicious and asking, readers to kind of withdraw from that online space sometimes.
Yep. I think that's very, very helpful. A reference comes to mind as Daniel was answering my question, and Daniel will immediately see this, but I'm not sure most of the audience is aware of this. So if I always tell my students, obviously up at the U of S, if you can imagine a better way to teach anything, could you imagine a better way than doing it with fruit? Fruit. So the Taoists actually pretty much conquered a particular fruit in their teachings. And I wouldn't say that every single person in China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and points much further than that. But we're talking about a third of humanity. For about 2,000 years, every time they pick up a peach, they generally have some reference to things that Taoists argued about, thought about, and had strong opinions about, and pretty much figured out, let's talk about the peach. This is actually in the book. So if you're imagining the opposite of sort of going online and having arguments with people and being very, very upset, what I always ask my students when we talk about that is I sort of say, let's take a moment and think about the peach. I've never met anybody who has a negative view of the peach. Plenty of people have opinions about various fruits. Could be the durian, for example. People are very upset about the durian. Stinky, apparently. But peach. So all of you, do you like the peach? And the Taoists do wonderful things with the peach. They have poems about it. Both of these texts allude. Zhuangzi, certain, but Dao de Jing, does it have peach in it? I don't know if Dao de Jing.
No,
I
don't think
Zhuangzi
so.
does.
Yeah, Zhuangzi, yeah.
Zhuangzi. But starting certainly by the 3rd century of the Common Era, which Common Era being since the time of Jesus, for most people. That's everybody always thinks of the peach. And of course, today I'm looking over at these books over here. This is so commonly understood in China and Japan that there's peach blossom spring. The idea that, you know, there must be a wonderful place where everything's great and everybody eats peaches, tied to the Zhuangzi in particular. Everybody knows this in China, and in Japan, there's even a little person. His name is Momotaro, and he's on delivery trucks. So they share this, and it's Taoism alive today in the wisdom of the peach. Last little point I would throw that Daniel might want to talk about here, because it was in one of his one of the things that he wrote. Taoism has extremely strong opinions about water, because water doesn't do anything extremely strongly. It doesn't do anything strong. It doesn't do anything extreme. It just does. And again, that's why the peach shows up so specifically, because the peach, of course, is very, very, very watery. So do you want to say something more about the significance of water in Taoism, but also when we think of the characteristics of water from a classical Chinese philosophical point of view and activism?
Yeah, sure. So the one of the sections of the book that actually is almost really a direct translation of the Dao De Jing is one I read to you. This, like, the supreme good is like water. I'm not sure if that's exactly how I phrased it, but it was very close. That's actually directly from the Dao De Jing. Very famous line. And it is all about, it's not a, it does focus on the weakness of water, but it suggests that water conquers because it is weak, right? I mean, think about how powerful water is in eroding entire landscapes, right? Water can cut away a mountain. You know, water can sweep away cities with floods. I mean, water is incredible, incredible force, even though it's the weakest thing in the world, right? It's entirely, what do you do with it? So this is a metaphor that I stuck with, and I didn't try to modernize, because water is the same as it was, you know, thousands of years ago. And also, it can work in protest situations. I did mention, actually, the Hong Kong protests of a couple of years ago, right? And they actually adopted a Bruce Lee slogan, "Be Water," which Bruce Lee had adopted from the Dao De Jing. And they used this to essentially adapt their tactics, right? They would flow towards a certain place, protest there. As soon as police showed up, they'd flow away, right? So you never actually engaging in confrontation, just kind of flow in, flow out, right? And that's like, that is really important when the opposition is carrying guns, right? You don't want to march directly into the face of, a gunfire. It's not going to turn out well. So I think this is a great metaphor that's still directly usable. So I was just happy to adopt it directly. I suppose maybe, I don't know if anyone in the meantime has thought of any questions. If anyone would like to jump in. Yeah,
you take
sure.
your book to Washington, D.C.
I actually am going to. Sadly, I'm not invited to the White House. but I do have an invitation to speak at a college in Northern Virginia. So I'll be taking it there. So maybe. Yes.
If there's an edition that you would recommend of the Dao De Jing in print.
There are so many. As George mentioned, there's a lot of bad ones. There are some that people don't know Chinese, but they kind of like divine the spirit of Lao Tzu and kind of like imagine something. To be honest, the one that I usually use for my own research is kind of old by now. It's by a translator named D.C. Lau from Penguin, but it's still available. Lao to me has just a really good balance of faithfulness to the original text while writing just beautiful kind of poetic English. And so I still use it. Maybe I'm a little old fashioned. I don't know, George, do you have a favorite translation?
I would agree. DC Lao's, the beauty of it is it's cheap. So I often use it in classes with students where we've looked at this. It definitely stands up. I want to say it was done late 50s, maybe 57, something like that.
It
Maybe
could
even
be.
early.
I think my edition is from early 60s,
Yeah.
but it might have been before then. Yeah.
It's a good one. I mean, the name that I mentioned before is, I think, true to form, sort of, PhD student research. I always think Richard John Lynn's is excellent.
Yeah.
But I still think it's very, very good. I will say that in The Alchemist, he has a reading list at the end, which is really valuable. Because the one thing scholars hate to do is to condense and to say, yes, but how many books should I read? I in particular have not finished. I won't. I don't think. I'm not a book guy. I like chapters and research articles because I could never ever say, oh, yes, but you should only read 7 or 8 books. And he has about 7 or 8 books. And he has, by the way, the very best translation of the Zhuangs, I agree, is Graham's. Excellent translation. Any other questions?
Well, I just wanted to say, like, this has been so helpful for me, just in thinking about people that we know, who, well, our daughter, for one, who's like very passionate about activism, and absolutely support that. But I personally have felt like, I feel like sometimes there's a different way to do this, but I didn't have like the language or the framework, I think, to kind of explain what my thoughts were about it. But this kind of gives me a lot better context for that conversation, I think.
Wonderful. So thank you. I'm glad. I hope it will be useful. It's wonderful to talk with kids who are old enough to have serious conversations with. I hope that, without dampening her enthusiasm for making the world a better place, you can share your own perspective on most effective ways to do that. I think oftentimes, there's a reason why college students are always at the forefront of activist movements, right? They're full of passion, they want to make the world a better place. Also being exposed to new ideas all the time, trying and thinking you can really revolutionize something. And as people, I'll only speak for myself, but you also work with, college kids all the time too, right? You want to kind of bring to students as an educator, I want to bring to my students, a little bit of broadening the world and broadening experience without killing off that passion, right? And so that's kind of part of my book, and when I've presented the book to students, what I'm also trying to do with that is say, this is not about telling you to be quiet and accept the world the way it is. It's about, like, take a beat, think about what's going to be the most effective way to reach the goal. So however those conversations go, I wish you the very best of luck with it, and best for your daughter as well.
You kind of spoke about this a few minutes ago, but I'm intrigued to hear you speak a little bit more about the idea of Wu Wei and doing activism.
Yeah. So the title of the book, calling this The Activist, is almost like a little joke for myself, right? Because Wu Wei is literally usually translated as non-action, right? So how do you take Wu Wei and make it as a basis for activism? I thought I would take this on just because Daoism is full of contradictions. So I thought, what's one more? But I think one of the things about Wu Wei is that I think is actually well understood by people who sort of even are not necessarily scholars, but just kind of get into reading the text a little bit, is that Wu Wei, although it means non-action, it can be translated relatively well that way. It doesn't just mean sitting and doing nothing at all, right? It really is more about not directly trying to cut against the world, not trying to force the world in ways that are ineffective, but like seeing how the world works and then kind of acting in it in ways that produce an effect. I think there's a this didn't get in the book at all. There's an ancient Chinese story about the legendary first dam builder called Yu, right? The Chinese rivers flood historically with disastrous effect. And Yu was trying to, there had been a series of dams on the Yellow River that always kept failing because people would just build a straight line right across the river, and you're just going to get the river knocking it down. So what do? And so he had the great idea to actually build the dams in a way that don't directly oppose the flow of the river, but shunt it sideways, right? So just like if you're actually thrown in the river, you don't try to swim against the current, you swim toward the shore, right? And so this kind of diverting is an important part of like Daoist thinking and Chinese aesthetics in general, right? Is not directly standing up against an impossible force. And that's kind of at the heart of Wu Wei, right? It's not about not acting, not doing anything at all. It's about not trying to butt heads with the world, but trying to, push in gently in just the right way, just the right place. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, I mean, what I would add, and Daniel knows this extremely well. So my expertise is actually Buddhism, not Taoism. And Buddhism comes from India. So, and many of you may or may not know, but of course, the ancient language of India, Sanskrit, is of course related to most European languages. So we actually are what we say without, not, do, not, don't do. We're negating the verb. So the way you do that in Sanskrit is extremely similar to, Iranian languages and most European languages. That's not Chinese. And Daniel's going to chuckle when I say this, but of course, Wu Wei doesn't mean not doing or non-doing at all. There's 3 different ways to do that in Chinese. It means without. Do something without. So it doesn't actually, that's the pun of the activist. So it doesn't mean stop. That's not, if you were going to do that, you would say fei. You would use fei, bu. You do this a million other ways. So it actually means do things, but do them withoutness in your way. And that's what the entire text is trying to do. It's trying to get you to do something. And sort of a way for all of us, based on this conversation, to understand this, and The Alchemist does this, his reworking and retranslation does this throughout the text, is the problem with all language, almost every way we ever do it, is language is constructed across every single language on the face of the planet around binaries, okay, black, white, for example, and all these things that we constantly, spicy, mild, just for you to pay attention, pierogi, mild, anything, almost anything eaten in China, spicy. So, that kind of a thing. And so when we're thinking of Wei, what we're thinking of is they're saying, do things, just don't bring that to it. Don't bring these ideas there. Another way of thinking about this is Canada, the United States. One of my wonderful colleagues up at the University of Saskatchewan wrote a brilliant award-winning book about the history of the United States-Canadian border. And of course, the history of the border is where? It's terribly complicated. Anybody who's ever driven directly south from here, turns out the birds, the dogs, everybody goes across that border all the time. We're just the weird humans that are like, where am I? That would be the Wu. Throw away the border, throw away the United States and Canada and realize it's people. So that's what these texts are really talking about. And The Alchemist really pulls this out to be able to really tee that up very nicely, the way in which it's saying, act more like water. Because remember, water doesn't have another. Empty isn't the opposite of water, or dry. That's not how it works.
Thanks. Are we about out of time?
We're pretty much
Yeah,
out of time.
Okay,
But
all right.
if there's any final questions, feel free to ask them now. Okay. All right, awesome. Well, thank you once again, Daniel and George, both for being here. I'll reiterate again, if you'd like to get a book signed, we have some on the back table, we have some up at the front here. But yeah, final round of applause. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.